Hi everyone, this is Heather Lottinen from the Flourish.Academy. This is episode 311 and I just returned home from a quick trip to Louisville, Kentucky to the Business Boutique Workshop, which I loved. It was fantastic. And I want to share with you a mistake I made. Oh, it's really not so much a mistake. It was just a small error in judgment. But I have to back up and explain where this was coming from. So years ago, and I think this comes from the book, How to Talk to Anyone. I think that's the book. I wanted to look in my library and refresh my mind, but I can't find it. I think I lent it to someone before I had library cards, but it doesn't matter. Anyway, the author in the book talks about making sure that you have a who's it or a what's it. And what she's referring to is something that you have, either something that you present yourself as or you speak about that makes you memorable. Because the last thing you want to do is be forgettable. So a who's it is maybe something like your name. So last semester I was teaching at the local college and I met a woman named Tuesday. And the first thing I said was, holy moly, you are so lucky to have that name because no one will ever forget it. It makes you very memorable. Try having the name Heather. You might as well be named Jennifer. Nobody's going to remember that because it's super common. And she said, you know what? I had never looked at it that way. I said, yeah, you're super lucky. You say Tuesday and it's a conversation piece. So that's what this author referred to as like a who's it. And then a what's it is something that you have or present that makes you memorable. Let me give you an example of that. When I first started speaking for HP, this was 2010, and the reason I remember that date is because it was the year the very first iPad came out. Okay, so I'm going down to speak at this conference in Atlanta, and I'm just this small town photographer, you know, the little guy. No one knows who I am, I promise. And I'm speaking on a given day, and the night before they have a cocktail reception where people are meeting and mingling. And this is like, you know, the CEO of Marathon Press and MPix and Miller's is there and Snapfish. And so I want to make a good impression and I want to be memorable, and they all know each other and I know no one. But when you're at a cocktail party, you know how you have a bunch of small groups of people talking? I'm certainly not shy. I can walk into one of those groups and introduce myself. But what tends to happen is you might get caught up in one group or maybe another group and you really don't meet a lot of people. You can't meet everyone because then the night is over. Okay. So I had just purchased the first iPad and I took it with me and I put a bunch of my favorite wedding photos on the iPad along with my name. Periodically it would say Weddings by Heather, and I believe in the slideshow there were even a couple photos of me. Okay, so I set up the iPad. I had flipped the case so it was sitting on one of the cocktail tables, and I started the slideshow and it was my favorite images and had some business cards there. Now I did not stand next to the cocktail table like Vanna White, like here's my work. No, because I'm not a weirdo. I just set up the iPad, let that slideshow play and walked away, and then went with a couple of groups and met a few people. And I only knew one person. She was they called her my handler from HP, and she was awesome. She was pretty busy that evening, so I did make it a point to meet as many people as possible, but I knew I was not going to be able to meet everyone. Okay, so I'm speaking the following day, and I'm really up against the wall. I'm the last speaker of the day, which is not the most desirable position, and I'm speaking after the keynote who is highly respected and revered in their industry. I'm just like the little guy, and I did not want to stand up there and say, hi, I'm Heather Lottinen from Pittsburgh, I'm a wedding photographer. I kind of wanted them to already know who I was, so that's why I set up the iPad. Okay, so the next day, as I'm preparing to speak and I'm kind of walking around, everyone knew who I was. People were coming up to me left and right. Hey, that was your iPad, wasn't it? How do you like the iPad? So the iPad became my what's it. And that's just something unique or different that you can present and connect with people on. So again, this goes back to the book, How to Talk to Anyone, and you don't want to be forgettable. Okay, so that was my what's it. So whenever I am meeting people or working with people, I am always trying to, number one, establish common ground. Is there something we have in common that we can talk about? And I will try to find a way to make myself memorable. I am super over the top generous with compliments and encouragement to people. Do you know why? Because it's free and it helps motivate people. So I will find something to compliment you on. If I'm at a wedding, it is nothing for me to walk around a wedding and give people compliments everywhere. But I like to make my compliments a little bit more unique and special. So I wouldn't just say to someone, oh, you look nice today, because of course they look nice, they're at a wedding. I would say something like, oh wow, that color looks great on you, or your hair looks amazing, or wow, do you do your own eyebrows because they look really good. You know, you can pay attention to, or you can tell what's important to people, because if somebody does their makeup really well, you know, then you should compliment them on it. Or if somebody's really pretty, you know, pretty people get told they're pretty all the time, but I'll say things like, wow, your skin is fantastic. So tell me, were you born without pores, or is there something that you're doing? So I'll say something like that that's a little bit unique or different. That's my what's it. That's my way of being memorable. Now these people may not recall my name, but that's not important. I just want to make them feel a certain way. Who was it? Was it that Eleanor Roosevelt who said people won't remember what you did, but they'll remember how you made them feel? I'm a huge believer in that, and I love to encourage people, and I want to be memorable. So I will go out of my way to pay a compliment, or to encourage, or to find common ground, or again with the iPad example, I'm just always doing things like that. Okay, that's the backdrop for this story. When I'm at Louisville, I know that Donald Miller will be speaking at this conference, and I am a super fan of Donald Miller. I have read all of his books. I love him. He's hilarious. I follow Building a Story Brand podcast. He is fantastic. Okay, I'm talking super fan. I was a VIP. I paid to be a VIP at this conference so that I could meet him. And I thought to myself, okay, if I meet Donald Miller, I want to be memorable, because he meets a ton of people. Super fans like me are a dime a dozen. And so I want to stand out in the crowd, and I'm not quite sure how to do that. So I thought to myself, you know what? I'm going to wear a hat. I'm going to wear a hat because that's different, and people don't usually wear hats, so I'll wear a hat and I'll stand out. So I'm like super proud of myself for coming up with this idea that I'm going to wear a hat to this conference, right? So I drive down to Louisville, Kentucky, and I'm going to wear a hat to stand out. It's Derby season. Everybody's wearing hats. Not only are there hats everywhere, but their hats are way more impressive. This is the hat I wore. I wore this in a video the other day. This hat. I wore this hat, which is super cute. But compared to the Derby hats, that is hilarious. Isn't that awesome? I was going to stand out by wearing a hat in Kentucky during Derby season. No, I'm not going to stand out. He's never going to remember me. Well, he might remember me, because you know what? I rushed him at the VIP lunch and I said, hey Don, my name's Heather Lottinen. I'm a super fan. I think you're hilarious. The podcast is great. Super fan. Okay, a little bit weird, but whatever. It was just so funny to me how I thought I was so smart wearing a hat to Kentucky. Everybody's wearing a hat, and theirs are better than mine. But that was just a good example of how I try to stand out. So I'd love for you to comment. Have you heard of this who's it, this what's it? And what do you do when you are shooting or meeting people to make yourself memorable? You do not want to be the best kept secret. You do not want to be forgettable. You want to be unforgettable. You want to give people a reason to talk about you. Even if they don't remember your name, they might say, oh, that was that lady with the hat who thought she was going to stand out in Kentucky during the Derby. Now, if I had one of those giant hats with feathers, which by the way, I would wear, then maybe I would stand out. But you have to make yourself memorable. And I actually meant to grab them on camera and I forgot. But while I was in Kentucky, I bought a pair of pink glitter sparkly Keds, like tennis shoes, that I'm gonna wear for a shoot next week. I do things like that, or sometimes if I'm going to an event, I will do my hair kind of crazy or just different, you know, like maybe really crazy updo or something a little wild for me, I guess, and people will remember it. They'll say, oh yeah, you had your hair done, or you had this, or you were that. Just find a way to stand out. Now, if it's not your name, it is most definitely not my name. So I alluded to earlier, Heather is pretty boring and very common, but if you have a name like Tuesday, then you are set because you could just talk about your name. And by the way, I met a Jennifer the other day who spells her name with a PH instead of an F. How lucky is that? And when I met her, I said, oh, your name is spelled with a PH. And she said, yeah, my mom really stuck it to me. And I said, oh, your mom gave you an incredible gift, because now it's something to talk about. Could you please like, share, subscribe, leave a comment. How are you going to make yourself memorable? Think of meeting a lot of people, standing out in a crowd, whether that's a networking event or a wedding or a new client. How do you make yourself unforgettable? I'd love to hear your ideas or what you're doing. I'll see you in the next video.